Hey Ken, this is Greg. It's Monday, January 31st, the year 2022, and ready for another lesson on To Kill a Mockingbird. I actually finished this, we actually finished this in class today, this part of it. We started on the next chapter as well. This is chapter 12. This is the first chapter of part 2. And again, part 2 has to deal with the trial and then the dealing with Bob Ewell at the end of the book as well. But the main chunk of part 2 has to deal with the trial. Harper Lee, the author, has been for about the last 2 or 3 chapters kind of smoothing in or moving in on this part and giving us some hints or laying the groundwork for this part of the book. This chapter has some interesting things in it. You can see my list on the board here, which we'll go over as we go through here. It's again, they're not in the trial yet, but they're getting ready to get there. They're just working on it. All right, things I want to talk about today. First of all, Calpurnia's status as it relates to working for Atticus. If you recall from this chapter, Atticus is in the state legislature, so he's been gone for about 2 weeks. And he left money and instructions for the kids to go to church. However, Calpurnia invited them to her church as well. And they said yes. And she got real excited about it. She cleaned them up, scrubbed them really nice, got all their clothes in tip-top shape. And again, obviously, she was very excited about taking them to her church. Now, her church is an all-black church, as you can imagine, because everything was segregated back then. There's still all-black churches, all across the country. I used to work when I worked at Chesapeake, I worked in a section of town that was predominantly black, and there was just, black churches there. My wife and I and some of our family members, we drove to South Carolina, and we drove out to the beach called Edisto Beach. And on the way, it was about every mile or so, there was this little bitty church there. And we were actually there on a Sunday, and they were all black churches, and they literally met all day. They would have their church service in the morning, and then they'd have a meal, they have some games or whatever, and then they have another service Sunday night as well. Real poor looking places that we saw. Didn't even have a paved parking lot. People just parked in the grass. You thought when we first went by them, we thought they were abandoned places, but they weren't. They were still in use. So anyway, Calpurnia invited Jim and Scout to her church, made them all up, dressed them, shined their shoes, just did everything possible to make a good impression upon the people in her church. When I put it there, Calpurnia's status. She was kind of a higher social status than most of the people that attended church with her because of who she worked for. She worked for Atticus Finch, who was well-liked and well-respected by everybody, nearly everybody in Macomb County and Macomb the town as well, but especially the people here that are at Calpurnia's church. And there's a couple episodes later in the story that will demonstrate this, but they hold Atticus in high regard. And so Calpurnia's status goes up as well because of who she is working for. Now, I truly believe that Calpurnia was well liked and respected to begin with just because of the type of person she is. She seems like a very responsible, very kind, even though she's kind of rough to Scout at times because Scout needs it. But she seems like to have an excellent head on her shoulders to begin with. But again, in her community, in the black community, working for Atticus Finch does nothing but give her a higher social standing as well. And as such, she's bringing these 2 white children to their all-black church, and she wants to make a good impression upon them because, in a manner of speaking, they're her children. Now, she knows they're not really her biological children. I'm not saying that, but she's the replacement mother for Jim and for Scout, and she wants to put on the dog for everybody to see her kids, her children, And so that's as it relates to Calpurnia and taking Jim and Scout to her church. Second thing is the reaction of the churchgoers at Calpurnia's church. You know, they're walking up, and this woman by the name of Lula comes and she approaches, accosts Calpurnia, and basically says, what you got them children here for? Why are those white children here? They don't belong to this church. This is our church. This ain't their church. And Jim, got the picture real quickly. He wanted to leave, but Calpurnia stood up to Lula, but Lula wasn't going to back down. And after a period of confrontation, Scout said she noticed there was some movement in the crowd, and she and Jim had kind of looked down. They were rather embarrassed and felt out of place and everything. The next thing, when she looked up, Lula was gone, and the rest of the congregants took care of Lula. However they did that, I don't know what they did. They just got her out of the way. It doesn't indicate whether she was actually in church with them that day or not. But anyway, they got Lula out of the way because she was causing a problem for the Finch children, who again, these are Atticus's children, and they really, really like and respect Atticus Finch. And they don't want to cause any problems. And the rest of the people, the rest of the churchgoers, they kind of go out of their way to welcome Jim and Scout to their church, as they should, as anybody should. And you kind of get the big picture of what's going on. Nearly everybody in the black community is fully aware of what's happening. That Tom Robinson, of course, they know there because Tom Robinson attends their church, and they know he's in jail, and they know he's been charged with a crime, and they know a white man's defending Tom Robinson's white man is Atticus Finch, who again, once again, I'm repeating myself here, but he is well liked and well respected in nearly the entire community. He's at least well respected, we'll put it that way. A little bit later, we get into tomorrow's chapter, you find Jim and Scout are hearing a lot more things in town from adults about when they're walking through. Yeah, that's his boy, that's his girl, it's his children. Talking about Atticus. All right, next thing. All right, this kind of amuses me every time I read it. Reverend Sykes' seeming control of the people. Now, it's a poor church. It's an extremely poor church. But Reverend Sykes is for the next 4 weeks, they're taking up the offering and they're giving it to Helen Robinson, Tom Robinson's wife. Because now that Tom is in jail, has been charged with a crime, Helen can't get a job anywhere. No one will hire her. And so that makes it very difficult. So they're taking up the offering for her. Amazing. I don't know if you've ever been in a church service that happened. I have never been, but I've heard of it happening before. Where Reverend Sykes got the offering, he emptied it out, and he counted it up there at the pulpit. And he said, this isn't enough. Everybody needs to put, if everybody puts in another dime, that'll take care of it. But then he goes even farther. He particularly calls out a man out of the congregation and said, I haven't seen you come up yet, shaming him into coming up. And in the same way, when Reverend Sykes was making the announcements, he talked about somebody who had been there like in 5 weeks or however long it had been, and talked about about women in particular, and obviously he was making inferences, or he was making suggestions that was some of the women there were doing things they were not allowed in. So we had a good conversation about that in my class. I just asked him, I said, would you feel comfortable at a church like that where the preacher may call you out, if you're not in public, not take you aside, at another time, speak to you, but call you out in public from the pulpit and shame you and embarrass you. And, we really had a decent discussion about that. Of course, most of the kids said, no, I wouldn't go there. Today, of course not. Of course not. But then I asked them a question that you probably already thought of. You probably know the answer even when I asked. Why did the people in the congregation allow him to do that? What was the people's motivation for basically being ruled, at least church, as it concerns church and certain things of their lives? Why did they allow the Reverend Sykes to be that way? Now, the answer, I think, is a pretty fairly obvious one. If you remember our class structure, how the blacks were beneath everybody, and the blacks were excluded from many of the things that the whites were allowed to have, and not allowed to call themselves equals, whatever. So the black members of the community, they were kind of forced, out of necessity, to make sure that they were unified in order to get things done, like taking up the offering for Helen Robinson. And if they started arguing among themselves, then their front, their front of solidity would be certainly in question. They're the only friends that they had. The whites, other than Atticus and a couple others, the white people in town are basically going to leave them alone. They're not going to befriend them. They're not going to show them any special privileges or whatever. And so, the black members of the community, the only people that they have that they can rely upon, that they can receive counsel from or comfort from in hard times, are the members of their own community, the black community. So they kind of accept this as just as a means of showing their solidarity, of being unified, and to keep on, if I can word it this way, to keep on fighting for what they want and what they need in life. But anyway, I thought, man, it's kind of heavy-handed on the part of Reverend Sykes. But again, I've heard of church services like this myself. I've never been in one, although I have heard. Well, I've heard some pretty good, strong preaching before. I won't say that's not true, but he kind of got down with the people on a very personal level. And many people today would say it's none of his business, but it was their business because of them needing to keep together. Next thing was this thing called lining. Interesting. My kids, it took a while for my kids to figure this out, what was really going on. And how Zebo, Calpurnia's son, he was like the choir master. Well, they had no hymn books, and Calpurnia told them why. It's because there's only about 4 people in the whole church. Said there was about 100 there. There's only about 4 people in the church who could read to begin with, and she was one of them. Zebo was one as well. All right, so that's half. Half of them is Calpurnia's family. So it wouldn't do any good to buy hymn books. So he would. I thought this was interesting. He would sing a line, or he would say a line, and then the congregation would repeat the line and sing it. And then he'd go all the way through the song like that, one not verse, but one segment of the song at a time. And then after he'd gone through the entire thing all the way, then the congregation just take off and sing. I went to a predominantly black church over in Louisville about 20, 25 years ago, maybe 30 years ago. We went over there because there was some jazz being played. It was on a Sunday evening. And it was more than, as I found out later, it was more than just jazz. But that's why I went, because I love music. And they did very much the same thing, although everybody over there, as far as I know, could read. But they would just start singing, and somebody would get out and lead, and then other people would echo it and follow it. And then all of a sudden, just the whole place took off. And I found it rather, I'm not sure what the word I'm looking for. I enjoyed it. I'll just put it that way. I thought, man, this is really neat. Me being a music lover and everything, and rather exhilarating. I had a difficult time joining in because I didn't have the rhythm or the beat that they had, but I did find it rather enjoyable. And the same way with this lining that Zebo was doing for the members of the church, and he was just starting them up, kind of cranking the old Model A, get it going, and once it get going, they just took off. Calpurnia's speech among her own people. My kids took them a while to understand what was going on here and why. And Calpurnia talked, her people talked when she was with them, but she talked like white people when she was around white people. And so I quizzed the class. I said, why is this happening? What's going on here? What's the deal and everything? And they kind of beat around the bush. Some of them got close to an answer. But, the simplest answer is this. and I think this is pretty much what Calpurnia told Jim and Scout, I want my people to feel comfortable when I'm around them. And if I talk like I do around you two, talk like white people do, they're going to think I'm putting on airs. I think that was the phrase she used. And she's going to act like the rest of the people will think she's acting like she's better than they are because she works for Atticus Finch and she can speak well and she can read and none of the rest of them could. So I think the simple answer is why she talked like that is because she wanted to make her people feel comfortable. She didn't want to be an outsider even to her own people. What did she tell Jim or Scout or both of them? She said, look, I can speak their language and I can speak yours, the way you all speak. They can't speak white language. And me speaking white language is not going to make them speak white language. They're going to have to improve their vocabulary, they're speaking whatever, but they're only going to do it when they want to do it, and right now they don't want to do it. So anyway, again, this is another plus mark for Calpurnia to show her worldly wisdom, in social circumstances. She wants to help her people, and she realizes that if she doesn't talk like them, then they're just going to consider her an outsider and they're not going to listen to her at all. A couple things left. Tom Robinson's crime. He's been accused of, we already knew it, but found out in the reading here he's been accused of raping Bob Ewell's daughter. As you've read it before, I'm sure you've seen the movie before. I mean, just the trial scenes are just outstanding, and how anyone could think that he was guilty after witnessing the trial is, again, beyond belief. And yet, Atticus knew it was going to happen. We talked about that before, just because people, the whites who were in charge, they didn't like losing power, and they didn't like changing the social structure, and they didn't like making blacks equal with them. And again, if they would have found Tom Robinson not guilty, that would have been equating equality with him with the white people. And they were just not going to allow it. So Tom Robinson, later in the book, there's I don't know the exact words, but I'll just paraphrase it for you. There's a statement that Scout made later in the book. She said, from the minute Mayella Ewell opened her mouth, Tom Robinson was a dead man. And again, Atticus understands this. He understands it perfectly well. And he knows they're going to lose the trial, but he has to do the work so that they can potentially have a good appeal anyway. The last thing, oh my gosh, foreshadowing of horror for the kids to come. When they get home from church with Calpurnia, there's Aunt Alexandra waiting on the porch. We got into the next chapter today and kind of find out why Alexandra was there. I'll save it for you for tomorrow, because we may have 2 chapters tomorrow. But I'll combine it into one. But, of course, she's there, and, it just forebodes terror and horror, especially for Scout. Jim, too, but more so for Scout. So, anyway, we leave off here, and, again, tomorrow we'll get into chapter 12, and probably 13 as well, I would think. So, that's all I have for today, Ken. I hope you've had a good day today. I hope you have a better one tomorrow as well. I'll see you later.